You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is sponsored by Codify, a California benefit corporation. Visit Codify at www.codifi.com. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 106 for March 15th, 2017. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about fixing archaeology. Can it be fixed? Will we even get better wages and more work? Listen and hear our opinions on today's episode. It's an extension of the side hustle episode from 105, and we talk about basically why do we need a side hustle. So get your fingers ready for those Facebook comments because the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. Welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today are Doug in Scotland.
Hey, everyone.
Stephen in Calgary.
Hello.
Chris in Oregon.
Hi.
Sonia in Utah.
Hello.
And Bill in Arizona.
Good morning.
Yeah, we got a full house today, which is awesome because we're going to need everybody's experience and opinions to justify our position on this. So when we get raked over the coals in the comments on Facebook and other places, that we can have some ground to fall back on. It's not just one person spouting off their opinions. So if you haven't listened to last week's episode 105, or last 2 weeks episode, it was all about the side hustle, and I'm not going to go back into that too much, but just to say that our basic thesis, I guess, was that archaeology is not a standard business model. It's not a standard industry to work in, and that sometimes to make ends meet and to keep yourself going, you need to have something else going in your life. You need to have, some other sort of secondary income, not necessarily during the field season, although you can do that, but mainly during the off times, whether that's between jobs or over the winter, depending on where you work. You might have 5-6 months off in the winter. Up here in Reno and Nevada, I mean, people are facing potentially half a year off. I mean, the ski areas are talking about being open till Memorial Day. Which means lots of snow in all the hills. And Nevada has more mountain ranges than any other state. So that's going to take out a lot of work for a lot of people. But today, we're going to kind of move on from that a little bit to talk about a little bit more about, I guess, why these problems exist in archaeology, why this is what we have to do, and maybe some of our solutions to kind of fixing it. I personally don't think some of it can be fixed in the short term just because it's the nature of the industry and the nature of the business. I think there are ways to sort of mitigate it a little bit, but I don't know. I don't know if there's explicit ways to fix it. That being said, we don't want to discourage people from just right off the bat here. We don't want to discourage people from, trying to have a family, get married, live a normal life. You just have to know that as you're working in this business, you're not going to have a quote unquote normal life, more than likely, at least early on. Maybe later on you will because of different positions and such, but early on, perhaps not. So let's talk about some of the issues, and I'll get you guys' opinions on this from the other hosts. So when I do the Profiles in CRM podcast, I ask people, what is one thing you would do that would make one thing you would change that would make CRM archaeology better? And the two most common answers I get are higher pay and more work. Okay, so I think I want to tackle the sort of easy one first, which is more work. It's really funny when people say that because I'm not sure where that work is supposed to come from. If you want to go up to the highest levels of government and go back into, like the WPA or something like that and say, they created more work. They created more work because they needed more jobs. They needed people to work. But unless we do something like that, more work, just inherently more jobs, means more development, means more pipelines, means more, solar farms, means more all of that stuff. And that's not something we can do as an industry, really, to generate that work. We can do that as a citizen populace with our votes, if that's what we want to do, if that's where we want to go. But that's how you generate more work. The other way to generate more work, of course, is to reduce the number of people in the field. So if we went from, let's just say there's 5,000 people working in the field, just for a nice round number, then we could increase the quote more work. We could increase the amount of work by reducing that to 3,000 people. That way more people are employed for a longer period of time. That's actually a common strategy in a lot of industries, I think, is to increase the education requirements, increase the barrier to entry, basically, which decreases the number of people coming in. So that's incredibly controversial, though. So what do you guys think about this? Let me go to Bill, because Bill, you've done a lot of writing on really kind of the industry and working in this industry. What are your thoughts on this, on the more work question?
I mean, you're right about that. Uh, Cutting the number of specialists doing the work is one technique to get more individuals employed full time. But I guess the more sinister method would be to take over the work of companies that do other parallel tracks. So uh, a lot of communities can't actually afford planning. They can't afford, like environmental design and several other things. So another strategy would be to leverage, if we get profits and if we have good clients, hire those specialists in ancillary fields to start doing that work. Because I know that, one landscape architect or skilled geologist for the right company can bring in millions of dollars for just their amount of effort, and that can support more archaeologists. So
Mm-hmm.
the reason that's sinister is because then that takes away work from another industry, right? So no longer are we just doing cultural resources, we're now also doing planning and design and other stuff. And so that's another strategy that you can try to increase the profits, keep more archaeologists employed, but everything comes with a cost, and that'd be at the detriment to other industries.
Yeah, I agree. It's a real problem, and you're right. It could be a detriment. Sony was mentioning in the background that reducing the number of people delays projects. I would kind of argue slightly against that, because I'll add one more ingredient to this, to the reducing people, but also reducing companies. Out in California, there are mom and pop CRM operations all over the place, where somebody just decides they retired from a big company, or they just want to go off on their own, and they're like, let's just start something out of the house and then, do small projects here and there. That's great for them, but is it good for the industry? You know what I mean? It increases competition, which is always a good thing for the clients, of course, because they get their business cheaper. But then that reduces the benefits to us as an industry. I'm kind of a fan of fewer companies, not necessarily big, large, massive engineering firms, but just fewer companies. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that. Sony, what do you think about that, or Bill?
Well, Sonia, I think you can probably handle this a little bit better. I kind of actually hate that idea.
I'm not a huge fan of it. I'm just throwing
Really?
out ideas.
Well, I mean, the reason I said is that fewer people delays projects. I mean, honestly, we have a schedule that we have to meet in order um, to please our clients, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as much as we love the technology, it's still gonna take 8 or 10 people to, 18 to 20 days to survey 2,300 acres in the southeast while
Yeah.
digging holes. You know, if you take away 50% of my crew, it's going to take me longer to get it done, and that's going to delay a project. So I know you disagree with me, Chris, but I mean, technology can only do so much at this point.
Yeah.
And even if I have the most efficient crew, if you still take away those that may not be the most efficient, or some of those people drop out because, I don't know, they decide to retire and start their own business,
Mm-hmm.
um, and they can't afford a larger crew, we still have issues.
Yeah.
So I don't know that necessarily that reducing the number of skilled workers
Well,
or workers in general is the right answer.
but that's only kind of part of what I'm talking about with that. Really, what I'm talking about is reducing the number. So if you've got 8 people out there, right, and eight people that are qualified to be there, they're good at their jobs, but just statistically, unless you're just a super awesome person and you're really good at hiring, and you know all those people, if you don't know all those people and you had to hire off the street, then statistically, maybe a couple of them are going to be, maybe not the most efficient employees that they could possibly be, right? So what I'm talking about is reducing the number of those kinds of people. So maybe take 2 people away from your crew, not 4 people, not 50%. take two people and increase the skill levels of the six people that you have left, and they can do, more efficiently the work of eight. Because we all know, we've all been on plenty of crews where the bigger the crew, the more likely you have somebody that is really just skating by and doing half the work of somebody else that's sitting right next to them in a unit or a shovel
If
test line.
if
Yeah.
Chris, if you're expected to do 60 shovel tests a day,
Mm-hmm.
and you pull away two people who are doing 45 shovel tests a day, the remaining crew are going to have a real hard time picking up the remaining 120
Mm-hmm.
shovel tests that are expected if you remove those crew members. Additionally, you're also talking about, in doing this, you're also talking about taking older, more experienced crew members and pushing them off to the side as they get older. As we get older, we tend to slow down slightly. Although I've met archaeologists out there who are kick butt even into their 50s and 60s.
Mm-hmm.
But you tend to slow down a little bit, and so now, by doing that, by taking the people off your team that are slightly less productive,
Mm-hmm.
you're removing a large. You have potential to be removing a large knowledge base as well.
Sure,
So
but that goes.
it's just a caution.
Yeah, but that goes down to
Just
education
caution
too.
against that.
Yeah, that does go down to training and education. The fact that you're removing that sort of institutional knowledge that they've worked towards. The fact that it takes years or decades to learn that kind of stuff and to have that sort of knowledge in this field is also a really huge problem. I think personally, and also when you're talking about these numbers and you're saying everybody's required to do 60 shovel tests a day, and now they got to pick up another 120 across the six people that are left. First off, you divide 120 by 6, and that's only 20 shovel tests they have to pick up. And the way that I do proposals is that 60 is actually an average. That 60 is not the minimum number of shovel tests. It's not the maximum number of shovel tests. This is what we've planned on an average that people have to get done. And you've got people on that crew that are going to actually just do 70, 75 anyway, because that's who they are. And I'm talking about building a field that has where more people are like that rather than less, because your overachievers, your amazing people that are awesome at shovel tests are not the high end. They're not the 99%. They're the 1%. And I think I just like to increase our skill levels across the board.
Okay, so you're talking about each person picking up an additional or 20 shovel tests a day. Let's say you can do an average of 7 to 10 shovel tests that aren't going down a meter
Mm-hmm.
in an hour. So all of a sudden, you now have each person doing their 60 plus an additional 20. That's several more hours worth of work right there.
Right, but like I said,
I'm like, I don't honestly, I don't think. Well, we don't have to, go through all this, but it's just a caution. It's just a word of caution.
I hear you.
And I just, especially, and then we start looking at, performance statistics of older crew members versus younger crew members. Then we start looking at statistics of, all right, okay, should we be hiring young, brand new newbies who don't have a lot of training because A, they're cheaper, and B, they can work faster.
Yeah.
But they don't know the resource, or the area.
Right.
Or should we be hiring older crew members? And then we start going into ageism and all these other issues. And I'm just looking at this from a business perspective, and and as well as a labor perspective. Like, I don't want to see experienced crew be retired against their will. You know what I mean?
Well, it wouldn't be
because
Yeah, it wouldn't be against their will. It'd be against their bodies, which is just if you've got certain physical requirements for any job on the planet, you have to retire or age out at some point. Look at the aviation industry. You can't be a commercial airline pilot past the age of 60. I think it is 60 or 65. It doesn't matter what kind of shape you're in. When you hit that number, you're done. You're no longer a commercial airline pilot, just flat out. I mean, why is that? Why should that be any different for archaeology? Is my question. If you can't keep
Well,
up,
these people generally tend to move into more senior positions,
mm-hmm,
unless they haven't been trained for that. And
right,
training takes time and
for
takes
sure,
money. And if you're talking about reducing the number of staff members, you're not talking about doing a lot of internal, more office training or management training.
yeah,
I could get into a huge, business perspective on this and go on for hours, but we don't have that kind of time. I guess the important thing here that I want to reiterate is if we start working toward this, my body's failing, I'm going to have to retire. I guess where this is where your side hustle is going to start coming into play.
exactly.
Um, so, what are you going to do to pick it up? Like for me, I'm in my 40s now, and I basically, I look at it and I'm more on the business management side. I still love going out and doing archaeology, but I certainly can't keep up with y'all youngins. And
Mm-hmm.
um, but I also think, all right, well, if everything goes down the drain and I'm an utter failure at what I end up doing, maybe I'll go be a firearms instructor, or I'll be a seamstress,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe I'll just make costumes for people professionally. I don't
Right.
know.
All right.
You
Well,
know what I mean?
we've just got a couple minutes left in the segment, so let's go. Steven's been
Sure.
screaming for a comment.
Actually, I think everybody's been screaming comments while you've been having this discussion. Uh, I the big problem with your perspective, Chris, is that we all get old, and yeah, there's the point where you can't physically be doing what you were doing when you were 23, right? Um, and the problem is, like, we have the notion of, like, well, you just move up, but there are fewer positions there. And if you're talking about, like, more positions, more work, like, there's no place for those people to go. And the analogy I always have is for, like, professional athletes. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you're good until you're no longer good, and then you retire. But of course, professional athletes, for most sports, or most of the big league sports, they they've theoretically been making enough that they could, unless they made a lot of poor investments,
Mm-hmm.
they could retire on that, essentially. And we, clearly we're not paying our field techs like the professional athletes.
Yeah.
So I think that's a serious problem, that I don't necessarily have a good answer for. But just being, like, well, they need to move up, and they need to have the side hustle, so they're extra good, so they can stick around. It really has a strong, like, unrealistic expectations for what people will be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's uh, y- and I kind of feel this way with a lot of things. Like, you'll see the listicles of, like, 10 habits of successful people, and it's like, yeah, but they can have these habits because they're successful people. They're not successful because they have these habits in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm.
Because most of these sorts of things are, yeah, when you've made it, it's easy to make those assertions and assume that what worked for you in the luck of the draw
Mm-hmm.
will help everybody else out.
Right. Well, you're right. And we have a lot more to say on this topic, but we're out of time on this segment. We will come back on the other side and keep arguing about this, because I think I set the bar for argument, so you guys could all disagree with me. All right, back in a second.
Let's face it, the quality of archaeological field photography could really use some improvement. We aim to change this with the Codify Magic Photo Board. This lightweight but incredibly durable board is designed to help you take color-perfect photos of artifacts, features, and sites using almost any camera, even your smartphone. You need to see it to believe it. Engineered from exceptional quality, color-safe, high-pressure laminate, Codify Magic Photo Board is ready for tough field conditions. It's guaranteed to level up your photography. Start taking publication-worthy photos right in the field with the Codify Magic Photo Board. Available now for pre-order, visit codify.com/APN. That's codifi.com/APN today and get your promo code exclusively for listeners of the Archaeology Podcast Network.
All right, we're back. And so while we were having that discussion last time, there were a lot of comments in the background. That's what happens when you have 5 panelists on a show. So, Doug.
Yeah, it was a comment on your conversation about, shovel test pits and work and delays and
Mhm.
all that. Essentially, I think you guys are looking a little too low on the, or a little too detail oriented on what would happen if there were fewer people working.
Mhm.
And I think what you would actually see is much improvement, but not in the sense of, I think what you guys are talking about is, oh, you would do, 20 more test pits per person, something like that. And I
Mhm.
don't think that's too much more realistic. I think you could possibly improve it slightly. Um, but really, what it would come down to is if you had fewer companies and fewer archaeologists, you would then be able to let sort of the market that we work in take hold. And essentially, what would happen is one company would say, well, we only have 6 people. We can only do it in this sort of time. And this is what happens with every other sector is essentially you figure out either ways for more money to get it done, or you accept that it's going to take that long with fewer resources.
Mhm.
So in a sense, I've seen great examples. So like recently in London, they were working 2 shifts. So this is a city site, so you could turn on, those big floodlights and still work at night. But they had two 8-hour shifts going. Um, Almost, and at one point I think they did 3 8, so 24-hour
Jeez.
archaeology
Nice.
going on. Super expensive.
Yeah.
But also I know someone who did something in Canada. Essentially once you get that far north during the winter, work stops because snow kicks in and you just
Mhm.
can't see the ground. Well, what they did is they got a bunch of snow blowers and then leaf blowers and effectively blew off all the snow so that they then could do a pedestrian survey. Again, super expensive, but if if people are going to, if they really want it done in time, they pay more money, which raises wages.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't think, you're going to get much more efficiency unless you dramatically change how we do archaeology.
Right.
In a sense of, you know, we get robots to do it. That's one way to do it. But until you do that, there's going to be a limit. I think Sonia was right. You can't add an extra, even the best person's not going to be able to add 25% extra work, shovel test pitting, pit digging. You're just going to burn out your body. There is a physical limit,
Mhm.
unless you start getting archaeologists at the level of pro athletes.
Well, I mean, I actually just heard a Freakonomics podcast the other day talking about improving yourself and making yourself better. And one of the examples they used was athletes, and they were talking about how the current fastest marathon time is something like an hour better than the first marathon of the modern Olympics gold medal. Like it's just ridiculous how much better things have gotten, and that's how a lot of industries work. Everybody rises up at the same time, and the barrier to entry gets harder and harder and harder because of competition. You know that's that's social Darwinism, kind of. I mean, that's sort of how it works. And if you're not, that's the whole point of this podcast. If you're not aware of that system, and if you're not aware of the fact that you need to increase your skill level in order to stay competitive, in order to stay in your job, and this goes for any job. If you're just stagnant and sitting there at your desk and you're wondering why you're getting passed over for promotion, then this is why. Because somebody else is doing more than you are to get noticed, right? And it's no different for archaeology. It's just, I think, in some cases more difficult and more life-threatening in some cases as well. And by life-threatening, I mean your livelihood and things like that. But Chris, you had a comment from before, and I think probably some on these. So go ahead.
Yeah, just to follow up with Doug, I completely agree that we need to look to other fields for examples, and um, I think that we've been perhaps focusing too much on field techs, and like Doug said, the level of detail on how this impacts field techs and how to manage the way field techs work is, I mean, it's valid. It's a very complex issue, but I think that there's a lot more to it, and we need to be looking further up the food chain. But to look to other industries for examples, the food and beverage industry, restaurants and bars, they deal with very complex labor and management issues all the time. And there's companies, restaurants all over the world, but especially here in the States, to draw from, the kind of labor and management and wage issues that we deal with here in this country. The Pacific Northwest has been pretty successful in experimenting with new, like wage strategies and management strategies for restaurants. And so eliminating tips is one where you just pay more. And I'm not saying, do a direct parallel to eliminating per diem or anything like that. I would just use that as something to urge CRM managers to be looking into some more creative ways to handle their budgets and handle their wage. Like we do work within some pretty strict confines with the wage and labor laws that we do, but there's other ways to do management. And like Sonia's been pretty successful with that. Chris, you've been pretty successful with that. And so I think that there's other business models that we could work with too. Like we don't have to envision a CRM firm to all be the same thing. Like there's no one size fits all business model for a CRM firm. So, I think that there are some good points to having less CRM firms. I forget which one of you brought up the idea. I think it was you, Webby, that, maybe these mom and pop firms that pop up and end up competing with other firms for small projects. Maybe that's not the healthiest thing for the industry overall. But I think that perhaps the larger firms that are taking a more, I don't know, like 1990s corporate America approach to business management, I think that those aren't healthy either. I think that they have a lot of middle managers hanging out that are focusing really hard on billable hours, and that tends to bloat budgets and bloat projects, and it places in my opinion, an unfair burden on the field teams and on the project managers, because then they're forced to work with an ever dwindling budget because somebody's billing to a project that they honestly don't need to be billing to because their management is not doing anything effective. So I think that to move up the food chain would also, I think that would make bigger ripples in changing the industry rather than, let me correct myself. I would say in addition to field techs and, just field archaeologists, get rid of the idea of field tech, just field archaeologists in general. Of course, they need to be upping their skills. Of course, they need to be specializing and diversifying. That's just good for anybody as a professional in any industry, like you guys were saying earlier. But I think that there are ways to make some serious ripples really quickly and big changes really quickly by making some big changes in how management and how business models are done.
Yeah, you're totally right. I personally think that's the biggest problem is there's so many places where we can increase efficiency. And I don't mean just digging more shovel tests. I mean, from the business model, from the business practice of whatever size business you're in. I mean, we talk about these massive corporations, but there's still have tiny CRM departments inside of them being run by people who have no idea how to do business, but they're expected to. So, I think that's a huge thing.
Yeah. I'm gonna pick a bit of a fight with you, Chris, over the analogy of athletes.
Hey, Steven brought it up.
All right, Steven. I'm gonna do that. I think we have to be really careful when we're discussing this, because actually, in terms of talking about upscaling, professional athletes is actually not at all sustainable. It's closer to being like CRM than it is to what our goal should be, in the sense of most of them burn out. You literally burn through your body. What is it? 70% of NFL players are bankrupt after 3 years, so it's not financially great. Most of them end up with brain damage if you're in the NFL, but like across it's such a small amount of people that essentially, yeah, you can get those skills really elite, but you burn out everyone along the way
Mm-hmm.
and essentially leave vast majority of the people doing it just, you know, hollow shells of themselves. I think a better analogy would be, you know, diversifying your skills and working that. But I would never encourage anyone, especially with the modern working system, to become the greatest at anything, because
Mm-hmm.
there's no guarantee in 20 years that thing is going to be still around, that job. I mean, you could be the greatest GIS tech in the world, but in 10 years, suddenly robots can do it, and you suddenly have no other skills.
Mm-hmm.
So, which I think comes back to our whole point about why people start side hustles, is to sort of broaden their skill range.
Right.
Yeah, and I think one thing, just to expand upon what I just said, and also to follow up with Doug, is that, you know, if we're going to move up the food chain, if you move way up the food chain, there are also some big structural barriers to, you know, having a better livelihood. You know, like our healthcare system is absolutely broken. You know, wage and labor protections are getting stripped away by the day. So, you know, the deck is, that's just to say that the deck is, you know, I feel unfairly stacked against people who are lower on the food chain.
Yep.
I think in some ways a lot of this goes back to our expectations on life. I think a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people expect that when they finish that bachelor's, they're just going to hand out and you know I think a lot of people understand that it might be rough getting their first job, but they fill out a couple resumes, and then what they expect is that they're going to get hired by a company that will find all the work for them, that will provide food and lodging through the contracts whenever it's time to go work, that will provide an office and a keyboard and a place to do their work and provide artifacts to analyze and projects to dig, and then provide the travel money for them to go to a conference even if they don't present. And then they're also supposed to earn a wage that's high enough for them to buy their first starter 2-bedroom house alone, in no matter what city they live in. And they're supposed to be able to have a car and all this stuff, and internet and a new phone. And I mean, it's like almost everyone has these kind of expectations, but that was like maybe what our parents could have had 40 years ago. I mean, that was a one-time deal that came in the wake of World War II when we destroyed half the world and then all got paid to rebuild it all, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so if you look at the society that we live in, there's so many people who believe that they're going to live at the same level as their parents, and a lot of parents don't really understand that. And so they kind of are like, well, you know, when I was your age, I had my first home, and well, when I was your age, when I got my bachelor's, they just let me walk in the front door and I was a manager in 5 years. I mean, it's a whole different world. There's 7 billion humans now. We don't have room for all of us to have our own homes, and we don't have room for us to get, you know, new phones every single day. All this kind of stuff is changing around us, and at the same time, uh, unless you're wealthy, you're fighting for the same smaller piece of the pie with more humans that are more skilled than ever fighting. And so I think in a lot of ways, reorganizing what we expect out of life, you know, that's one thing that really needs to happen. But on the other hand, I think we need to reorganize what we expect out of work. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of us are still trained that people will wake up in the morning, drive through traffic, go to an office somewhere, sit there, do work at a computer, or you know, we'll all drive to an archaeology site, we'll all dig for 10 hours, and we'll all go home and drive back, you know, and that 40 hours equals work. Anything less than 40 hours isn't like a real job. I mean, that whole idea of driving across town for to go to work where we work on a computer and we already have 5 computers, you know. I have a
Mm-hmm.
box in my house of old laptops and tablets that are obsolete that I pretty much don't even know what to do with. I mean, all of us have the devices to work at we can work in our cars, we can work anywhere we want. So the whole idea that people will have to drive all these many miles, why? Like, why are you limited on the people who are living in your community to hire?
Yeah.
Why are we worried about working 40 straight hours? I mean, if you can live in a rural place and still get paid 32 hours and you only have to show up, you know, when it's a 40-hour work week to go to the site, why isn't that a possibility? Why can't you just work remotely all the time except for when it's time to go do the field work?
Mm-hmm.
We need to just rethink the whole way that we're thinking about employment and just everything, because the end result is really unhappiness on all sides, management and workers.
Yeah. Yeah. Indeed. I have some comments on that we'll get to after the break, but Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add that, touch on and expand what Bill said, is that this is also not something that is specific to archaeology. All around, all sorts of different professions run into the same problem. I got an email maybe 2 months back from a biologist um, talking about the same problems that field techs
Mm-hmm.
experience. So essentially, the people that go out occasionally with us when we're doing, environmental surveys and going out ahead of us, they're in the exact same thing. Biologists, they might get paid better, but they have the same problem of having trouble breaking into the profession and also mainly being temporary jobs so that you're never quite secure.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just us, it's actually a whole systematic problem across the world for the most part.
Yeah, you're totally right. And I think I want to expand on something Bill was saying because it's very relevant to my life right now. And that's managing, sort of rethinking managing your life, and rethinking what you're doing. I think this is why I'm such a fan of increasing your skills and things like that, because I just put a post up on Facebook about basically getting rid of probably 90% of my book collection as we move from a not huge place to an even smaller place. And I keep thinking it from the Star Trek model, quite frankly. And that's what I put in the Facebook post. I was like, they always say on Star Trek, they're on Next Generation, they're like, oh, we no longer focus on the acquisition of things and wealth. We focus on improving ourselves and making ourselves better people. And I think we can all take a pretty good lesson from that, because the things that we have, just look around your house, look around your surroundings right now as you're listening to this podcast. Unless you're a true shovel bum and you're sitting in your car, then just sit there and weep into your dirty sock coffee. But anyway, that's just look around what you have and say, why do I have these things? Do I have these things because I'm a collector? Do I have these things because I have the space? Or am I just a goldfish and I'm increasing the size of my material wealth based on the size of the things that I have, the size of my dwelling? If I had a 6-bedroom house, I have to fill 6 bedrooms with all kinds of crap. But if I had a 1-bedroom house, now I only have to fill 1 bedroom with the stuff. So anyway,
Yeah,
that's kind of what I'm thinking, Bill.
yeah, but that can have a boomerang effect, right? So if we're working towards the betterment of ourselves, but all we're doing is digging shovel probes, writing the same table, going to work, doing the same mindless, task, perhaps research design might actually end up having to come into play when people are trying to actually improve themselves and they really want to do better archaeology, and they're kind of not okay with, like, we walked, there were things, they were this, and there was an arrowhead, but you can build your road anyway.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. All right. Well, let's go to break, and then we'll wrap this up with hopefully some positive comments on the field, and turn all this negative "you're not good enough" stuff around. So we can hopefully people commenting on Facebook have listened this far, and we'll maybe have some good stuff. Back in a second.
Hi everyone. This is Christopher Dorr with Heritage Business International, and here is this week's Heritage Business Tip from the archive. This week, we look at an important point about pricing your products or services. While many heritage organizations are obsessed with getting their prices down, strive to be the most expensive organization in your sector. To do so means you're going to have to work across your organization to bring more value to your clients. Remember, price equals value. You want to be in a position where your clients are saying, I don't care what they cost, I only want to hire your firm. To receive our most up-to-date heritage business tips, you can subscribe to our free weekly email at heritagebusiness.org. Until next time, this is Christopher Dorr.
All right, we're back for our last segment, and like I said before, I think as my comments were sounding more Borg and less Starfleet, I want to reiterate that I am thinking more Starfleet. I'm thinking highly trained, highly skilled, highly motivated personnel that simply just love their jobs. I think that's really a primary ingredient of happiness in CRM. Is you need to be. The whole point of doing this episode, I think personally, was you need to understand manage your expectations, know what you have to do to be successful, and know what this field is going to give you in return, and then know what a career path looks like. When we're talking about 20, 25, and 30-year career field technicians, that's a that's an issue. That's a problem. You don't see, like I brought up the aviation industry earlier. These pilots that are retiring at 65, they're flying the 747s. They've got the international routes. They're only gone a week out of the month, and they're making $200,000 a year. They've worked up to that position, right? We need to do that as field technicians moving up through the ranks as well. And if you're not going to do that, I mean, you don't often see a 65-year-old pilot that's been flying the regional airlines for 30, 40 years. You just don't see that, because as they build their time, they build their skill levels, they fly different planes, they work for different airlines, they move around different companies, and they increase their skill levels. So I don't see how this field is really any different. And, you just have to keep going.
One of the things that I think a lot of us actually have problems with is that our personal identity is so closely related to what we do for our job, right? And part of that is being an American, especially if you live in certain parts of the country. The very first thing they say right after they tell you their name is, "I work here. What do you do?" And what they mean is like, they don't mean like, how do you put your kids to sleep, or, how do you budget for groceries? They mean, what do you do for work? So that is your identity, what you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when your identity is so closely related to what you do for work, then you're kind of actually working. You're living to work, essentially, and what you do it has a huge impact on your life. But if you flip it around and think about the fact that what you do is something that not only brings fulfillment to your own personal life, but also brings you money to help you live the life that you actually want to live. That's where I almost always tell people to start. What kind of life do you want to live? Because if you want to live that kind of jet setting life, then you need to think about some other kind of career besides archaeology. If you really need a huge house, and you have to have new cars, and you want to have a nanny, and you want to have vacations every 6 months or whatever, you're going to have to move into a different field than archaeology. If you want to discover things and research the past and see the kind of stuff that no one else has ever seen, now that also is important. But if it doesn't pair up with your idea of having 2 kids and a perfect life and a new car and vacations to go see grandma every month, then you still, even though you may love archaeology, this probably is not the field for you, because you're not actually going to get those kind of things.
I mean, let's be honest. A lot of us do have a side hustle, and we're not even calling it that. It's called our spouse.
Sonia, I think Sonia has to clarify, because husbands have a different perspective. And yes, it's sexist, but it's real.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, let's go to Doug while Sonia thinks about that. Doug had a comment.
Yeah, actually, I think the best thing anyone can do in archaeology is to actually separate out their work from their identity. Too many people, I mean, and this is not just for archaeologists, this is for everyone. You really need to separate out your identity from your work, because it just hurts that much more when you lose your job. And suddenly, not only do you not have money, but you don't have an identity. And I honestly think all archaeologists should figure out a way to separate out what they do for their day job from their identity. And that would make a lot more people a lot more happy, if we could figure out a way to do that. Because I personally think way too many people think they're Indiana Jones and that's their identity. And yeah, it's great when you're at a party and you say you're an archaeologist. And some people realize you don't dig dinosaur bones, but they're still happy when you dig dinosaur bones. But like, seriously, if there was one thing people could do to help improve the profession, is to separate out their identity from their work. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I've got some comments on that, but Steven, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, kind of goes back to something I said, I think it was the last episode, about there are no jobs, there are only projects.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally agree with Doug on that. Sometimes I think we kind of lock ourselves into the identity of being archaeologists. We turn down other projects because they're not archaeology enough. Like we have a specific idea of what it means to be an archaeologist,
Mm-hmm.
and perhaps a better way to think about this is, like I'm doing archetype archaeology right now, but maybe in the future I'll end up with, on a different sort of project, and it'll be, to kind of help me along in that, breaking down what it is I like about my job that are, like what are the attributes, let's be all cultural history. What are the traits in my trait list that I really like about what I do? And you can break that down and find projects in other fields that kind of follow that through.
Mm-hmm.
You build on those. Like I really like, say, problem solving and spatial analysis. What are other jobs that can do that? How do you pursue that?
Yeah. And you're right. I'm just kind of lost for words here. I think back to,
That's amazing.
I know, right? Back to what you were talking about, Stephen, and then what Doug mentioned about separating your identity from your archaeology. I'm kind of two minds of that, honestly, because Doug, what you said was, when you lose your job, then you're just completely disheartened. You've lost your identity, blah, blah, blah. You have no will to do archaeology anymore, and you're going to go work at the Gap, right? Or Starbucks or
Oh,
whatever
no,
the hell.
I didn't say it's that bad. I'm just saying it could be, when you're having a tough time at the part where you're no longer going to have money, and you've
Mhm.
also lost your identity. That's extra hard, and different people will take it different ways.
That's
Some
true.
people it will have no effect at all. Others, though, it's really gonna make you depressed.
Mhm.
And that's just different people are gonna take it different ways. I don't think everyone's gonna suddenly start working at the Gap, though, Chris. I'm not gonna take it that far.
Well, some people do take it that far, though. We've had episodes on, why people got out of archaeology and then getting back into archaeology and things like that. And for some people, that last project is the last straw. Right? I mean, that's it. They're done. And I have personal friends, and I know we probably all do, to which that happened. They were working along in archaeology, and all of a sudden, bam, they're out. They're in a completely different field. Now, one of these guys that I know, he actually got back in after 5 years of being out, and he's a field tech again. But he's also getting to the point in his career where, if he wants to stay in this, then he needs to actually increase his skill level, which he's doing, and look for, I guess, higher positions. He's got the experience for it. He just needs the skills. So, but back to the identity crisis issue. I honestly think that you need to, to be successful in this field, unlike other fields. Like if I was working the front desk at this building, I don't really care if I lose that job. I'm going to go find another job, right? It's not like a passionate thing to be a doorman at a building. Maybe it is for some people. I don't know. It's kind of a deal in New York, but it's I think to do this job, you need to have passion and you need to see it as your identity. Otherwise, you're not going to try hard enough. You're not going to try hard enough to learn new skills. You're going to get home from your 9 to 5 that you happen to have right now, maybe, or you're going to get home from shovel testing, and you're going to turn off your archaeology brain and go binge watch Game of Thrones until you pass out or fall asleep, and then do it all again the next day, which maybe you should spend a little time, not every day, but every other day or once a week even, watching some videos about how to do something better, reading a book on something or whatever. So I think the only way you can do that is to have passion about your job, to have passion about your about what you do, and to make this your identity.
Yeah, just to build on what you're just saying, and again, this goes back to what we were talking about last time. Yeah, spend your time learning about other stuff, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be about your immediate position,
Mm-hmm.
about that immediate job. If you enjoy something, like maybe you find it interesting to go out and learn about architecture, and but in our current job we hardly ever do architecture, right?
Yeah.
I think that going out and and I mean, really, this comes down to, in my mind, being like a healthy, productive individual, that you go out and you learn new things and you just kind of enjoy life. And a lot of times these things kind of circle back, and improve your professional life as well as your private life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm gonna completely disagree with you, Chris.
Not a surprise.
I yeah, I know. It seems to be a phrase. I'm now gonna be my new catchphrase. I
I don't.
completely disagree with you.
I don't think you even need to say it anymore. Chris will just save that audio, and then we'll just clip it in before you say everything.
That sounds good. I think you should definitely separate out your passion from your work, and if they overlap, that's great. But I'm also of the mind of you're sort of saying people are going to leave, and you talk about that like it's a bad thing. But honestly, with all those dejected archaeologists out there who basically complain and God, Debbie Downers all the time about the field and all this stuff, they really should leave. They should go and do something that's will pay more or make them more happy if that's what they're after, or just something like that. 'Cause honestly, I think too many people have too much passion for archaeology and they'll stick it out even when it's not good, because you really should separate out what is your work and what pays the bills and what you like to do, and what your passion is. I know sometimes you get lucky and you have the job that pays the bills and also happens to be fun, but for a lot of people you don't have that option. And I think it's too many people in archaeology have this, they're caught up in the idea of being an archaeologist and they can't get out. And we actually need more people leaving the profession, and going to do something else that will make them happy. And if that's, making them happy is getting more money or doing, something else that they like to do, I think that's a better choice than having people who are too passionate who then just ruin their life, and then rejected. Those people, we've all
Yeah.
met them in archaeology. Basically, God, there's nothing going well, even when things are going well.
Right.
Even when they have, backlog of projects for a year and they have money and stuff like that, they're just hateful. I think that's one of the things why I think people should separate out their identity from their work. And, if you can do that, then you can actually leave archaeology and maybe do it as a hobby because you like to do it, and actually do a job that will maybe, bring in more money or more stability.
Well, I'm gonna agree with you, Doug, on some of that at least, because I think everybody needs to find their passion, and that's exactly what you said. If their passion is outside of archaeology, they need to go do that. I encouraged my own wife almost 6 years ago now to leave archaeology. It happened to be the end of the field season out here in Nevada, and we were coming up to a winter with not a whole lot of work prospects. So it was a good time to do it. It wasn't like she just backed off a project, but she, went into essentially professional knitting and selling yarn and doing these things. I mean, that's what she wanted to do. It sounds a little bit ridiculous when you say it out loud, but it's an actual career, and she's doing well at it. And now she's managing people. She's enjoying her job, and she's liking what she's doing. She wants to change a little bit within that industry, but now she's in an industry that she really feels passionate about, and she just didn't really have that for archaeology. And I think that's the same with any business. I mean, I'm in a couple of startups right now, and when you start listening to podcasts and reading about kind of startup culture, like for example, you read about these incubators over in San Francisco, and these angel investors and all that stuff. They're not going to invest in you, and this has to go back to the evolution of sort of ideas, right? 40 years ago, you could probably get an investor, for your thing, because people starting new crazy businesses was not that very common. But now it's really common. So there's 1,000 people out there trying to build an app right now. This morning they decided that. And they're trying to do this thing, and now they're looking for investors. So investors have to be a lot more discriminatory. Well, they're simply not going to invest with you unless they just absolutely get the app and they just completely get it. But really what they want to see is that if you don't get this money from them, you're living under a bridge in your car. Okay, that's what they want to see. That's the level of passion that they want to see. That you are. And I'm not saying we need that in archaeology by any means, but that's kind of what the culture that we're moving to in a lot of different industries is. You need to have that drive and that ambition. Otherwise, somebody else is gonna win out over you because they do have that.
I actually disagree. That's the point I disagree on. Is
Yeah.
actually, I don't think you should have that passion. Like there's okay, different things for different people. Some people need that passion, but honestly, like through the most of human history, your job was your job. It wasn't your passion. Having a passion and having your career intersect is something that has only hit the middle class in the last 60 years in like America and some other modernized cities. The vast majority of humans do jobs not because they're passionate about them, but because they pay the bills and keep them from starving to death.
Right. Okay. I'm gonna cut you off right there because we're running out of time and I want to get to Stephen real fast. But I will say you're absolutely right. We don't live 50 years ago. We're not just trying to pay the bills anymore. We're destroying factory jobs. We're destroying menial labor with robots, quite frankly, and computers and things like that. So what we're left with are the jobs that we want to do. The jobs that we want to do to not just pay the bills, but to live our lives and be happy.
I'm going to agree with Doug and wholeheartedly disagree with you.
Great point to end on.
Yeah. Man, that is such a perspective of privilege. I don't even know where to start.
I don't think it's privilege. Anybody can do it.
Well, no. It really is. That like most people, it doesn't matter how enthusiastic you are about a particular thing or not, like especially in the VC game is that, there are way more losers than there are winners, but what you see are the winners. And so you come out of it being like, oh, you got to be, it's the most enthusiastic. And really, you're talking about like an economic Hunger Games there.
Mm-hmm.
And it that is not the life that most people can do. And not even because they're not enthusiastic, but because the opportunities are not there. They don't quite make that cut. And by saying that this is what you have to do to survive, you are essentially writing off a good, and I'm just making up a figure here, but let's say 50 to 75% of the population.
Higher.
What I was talking about for like finding out what you enjoy doing in a job and applying that to future possibilities, that's important. But keep in mind that those possibilities aren't necessarily super dynamic cultural startup sort of thing. It could be you're picking up the recycling from the for the shredding service. If that lets you have the life that you want to have, that's a good job. Jobs are not really a job comes down to paying the bills and living your life and figuring out your niche in how you live a life is the important thing. And it can be sometimes, especially for you, that's your life, that you want your life to be that aspect of archaeology. But that's not how it works for a lot of people, and it can't work for a lot of people, including a lot of people who are currently doing archaeology.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I agree with that, Stephen, and we're out of time on this podcast, so maybe we'll pick this back up with the next one and just keep the conversation going. But I'll just close by saying, and this is again just my opinion, my 2 cents on it. Feel free to disagree in the Facebook comments and wherever. But I think you spend a third of your life at a job, right? A third of your daily life at a job, and you spend 3/4 of your waking hours at a job. If you're picking up the recycling on the edge of the curb so you can go home in the evening and work on your passion, that is a good thing as long as you're doing that, right? But wouldn't we all just rather have our passion be our job so we could just do that and not have to have this other thing that we resent going to because we're just waiting to get home to do this other thing? I don't know. That's kind of my thoughts on it. But whether you can do that right now or not, that's something I think we should just work towards. I've only said nothing I've said today I think is actually 100% possible for everybody, but I think it's an idealized goal that you can strive for no matter who you are. So anyway, we'll pick this up on another podcast, I'm sure of it, and we'll get raked over the coals in the comments. So please do that so we can have more to talk about next time. But that's it for this time, and we'll see you guys next time. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/CRMArc-podcast. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for the episode. You can also email me at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or tweet your questions with the hashtag CRMArcPodcast, or you can tag @ArcPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to the show wherever you saw it. If you share CRM archaeology-related items on Twitter or Facebook or anywhere else for that matter, be sure to use the hashtag CRMArc so the community can see and comment. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Also, please consider donating to the Archaeology Podcast Network. Your donations help fund our bandwidth and contribute to our editing costs. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Nope, I refuse. I already said it once.
Oh, God. All right. This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and edited by Chris Sims.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to those... Fuck you piece of shit. Okay, here we go.
Bye.
I hate you. I hate you. Yeah. All right.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.